Hello there. Good morning. We're in Luke chapter 14, or at least you could read the bits I haven't commented on. There are several stories told by Luke which highlight the attempts by the Pharisees to bring Jesus into disrepute because of what he did on the Sabbath. It is a key feature throughout the Gospels that Jesus constantly found himself up against the religious leaders of his day who disapproved of what he did. And there are several parables and stories, all directed to the people who rested on their laurels, I suppose you could say. They were the people who thought they were in automatically just because of their birth. They were born Jews, they'd learned all about the Jewish ways, and they were in simply because they were born Jews. And there are many people, in our country who think that they are Christians simply because they were born in a Christian country. And when they were children, they learned the stories of the Nativity, and they go to church at Easter, and they go to church at Christmas, and for weddings and funerals, and they believe they're Christians. I've met many in my ministry as a chaplain, when you say, do you have any faith? And they say, well, I've always lived as a Christian. I would never harm a neighbour. I'd never do anything wrong to anybody. I would help anyone out if I could. And we see things like that happening, when there are floods or there's a disaster, something awful happens, and the community gets together and helps those who have nothing and gives, and they behave in a very Christian way. But that doesn't make a person a Christian any more than being born a Jew makes them automatically in the kingdom of God. It certainly wasn't true as Jesus spoke to the people around him. In verse 24 of chapter 13, he says, "Strive to enter by the narrow door. For many, I tell you, will seek to enter and will not be able." There's a warning in many of the scriptures here that we mustn't think that automatically, because we are the people of God, that everything is fine and we don't have to do anything else. Jesus said to them, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob will be, and all the prophets will be in the kingdom, and you yourselves will be thrust out. I mean, there are people, many Christians who believe, based on a verse in Romans, that all Israel will be saved, and that actually the fact that they are born children of God means that they will automatically be saved. And it's what many of the people in the Old Testament thought when they went after other gods and they disobeyed everything that God had told them to do. They thought that they were God's people by right, and it didn't matter what they did. And in Romans, Paul makes it clear that it's not automatic, that we have to be people of faith, children of faith, to be children of Abraham. Jesus himself said it to them in John's Gospel when they said, "We have Abraham for our father," and Jesus said, "You are of your father the devil," because of the things that they were saying to him and the way that they were rejecting him. If God was truly their father, they would have recognized Jesus. So there's a lot of thinking to be done for us in our attitude to the Jews, that when we associate with the Jews, we need to tell them the good news about Jesus just as much as we tell anybody else, because they need to know him by faith. And Jesus is going towards Jerusalem, and his heart cries out at the end of chapter 13 again for Jerusalem, the place where so many great men of God, great prophets, were killed by the people, the great centre of their faith, Jerusalem. And he says this awful thing: it cannot be that a prophet shall perish away from Jerusalem. What an awful thought, that Jerusalem to Jesus meant the place where he was going to die. And whereas it should have meant the place where you went to meet God, where God was central, where the temple existed. It was a sad thing. You hear the sadness in the voice of Jesus when he says, he says, behold, to Jerusalem, behold, your house is forsaken, and I tell you, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That, of course, was what was said on Palm Sunday when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey a week before he was killed there. Jerusalem, the glorious city, Zion, the place foretold in the Old Testament, the place where the name of God would be honoured, was actually the name where God's people were despised and God's people were murdered. What a sad thing. And Jesus knew it about Jerusalem. His heart ached that all the good things that God had planned for Jerusalem had not happened, that Jerusalem had become an awful place. What a strange thing. And chapter 14 begins with Jesus healing a man on the Sabbath, knowing that he was being watched by the Pharisees. And he says to them, which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? Why couldn't they see that actually acts of compassion or acts of necessity were okay for the Sabbath? That none of the laws of God were greater than the law of compassion, which he taught, that what we should do, we should live our lives by the thought that we love God with everything that we have, all our mind, all our soul, all our spirit, and that we love our neighbour as ourselves. That love is the fulfilling of the law, not fulfilling every last little detail of it exactly when it meant that love was contradicted by what you did. So there's some thoughts, some rambling thoughts as we cover quite a bit of the rest of chapter 13 and the first story in chapter 14. And I'll leave you to ponder. I'm sure there'll be things in that God will give you to think about. And perhaps think through your own feelings and thoughts and responses to our support as Christians of the nation of Israel, and how we should think about it. It's for each of us to determine it in our own heart. But I don't think you can get away from in the Gospels the fact that Jesus criticised the Jews of his day because they lived by laws and not by faith. So I'll leave you to think today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.